Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. When the Islamist Hamas perpetrated its horrific massacre on October 7th of last year, most outside reactions, apart from Iran and its associates, was naturally sympathetic to the victim of aggression, namely the State of Israel. But as the Israel Defense Forces went on an air and ground counteroffensive, the human toll in Gaza took center stage, with heavy diplomatic pressure being put on Jerusalem to be more attentive to civilian casualties and displaced populations. As the war seems to enter a late and perhaps final stage, how do Western nations, updating their approaches to the parties in this regional conflict and its offshoots, balance their policy positions with political pressure? Joining us to analyze this are, from the Netherlands, is no other than Professor Uri Rosenthal, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Good to see you.
Very good indeed. And also joining us from elsewhere here in Jerusalem is Dr. Dan Diker, who is the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. It's good to see you as well, sir.
Good to see you as well.
And let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set a stage for us.
So either coincidental or concerted, what we have seen over the last few days is a campaign by both Washington and some European capitals against at least Israeli policy, perhaps even the current Israeli government. And it has to do with Britain and now not only Britain, but another European country joining the United States in sanctioning what they term as violent settlers in the West Bank. It has to do with a Dutch court siding with those who would impound a shipment of replacement parts for Israeli fighter planes, claiming that they would be used in what they term genocide in Gaza, and the merits of the case do not matter. It's the public opinion or the spirit of the times. There is a tide of public and political opinion against Israel because of Gaza, regardless of the fact that it all started with the horrific massacre by Hamas. The original sin has been forgotten. Only the crime fighter going against the sinner, trying to punish him and to rescue his victims, only he's being vilified. And of course, we didn't delve into the Biden administration and its policy, but it is obvious that when the British Foreign Minister David Cameron talks with his counterpart Tony Blinken, they both come out with seemingly separate but identical policy moves.
Indeed. Well, it just shows to what degree does disinformation promoted by totalitarian regimes such as Qatar, utilizing its engine of Al Jazeera and others, which is, by the way, predominantly occupied by workers of Palestinian descent and people related to that. We're talking about Turkey utilizing organizations such as TRT World and Anadolu and other organizations that have severe impact on Turkish dissidents living in the Netherlands and in Germany and in other places, as well as other countries such as China, Russia, selling all kind of packages to journalistic media hubs, which are narrative-driven and naturally go against Western sentiments at large, but also the State of Israel in particular. I'd like to bring initially Dr. Dan Diker into the conversation and ask what went wrong from an American perspective. Initially, we'll refer to the European approach from Professor Uri Rosenthal, but from an American position, is this election year in the political interests of the Biden administration somehow fogging their capacity to make the right judgment at this stage, or is it trying to maneuver within the rationale of U.S. interests globally and in the Middle East in particular, as well as trying to dissuade somehow public opinion in the Democratic camp of the United States to impact the foreign policy that is so vital to the U.S.?
Jonathan, I think you've set up the question perfectly. It seems to be a combination of the two. There are ideological predispositions of this administration that are very much aligned with the previous two Obama administrations, of which President Biden was vice president at the time. And I will say that at the time, Vice President Biden was far more aligned with Israel during the Obama years than Obama was when he talked about no daylight between himself and the Palestinians and more daylight between himself and Israel. Well, we've had a mass murder now on October the 7th, which was the climax of years of genocidal rhetoric by the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and affiliates. That the truth is, it all began. It has been going on for 45 years and sourced in Tehran and extending through the tentacles of the Iranian regime. As you said, you used the word disinformation. We are very much in a genocidal war driven by perception warfare. The Soviets taught us about perception warfare. The Nazis taught us about perception warfare. The Iranian regime has taught us about perception warfare. The Chinese have taught us about perception warfare, and very much, and as the Soviets, as I began this analysis. And what we're seeing now is the United States that's driven by the notion that the Iranian regime, as the Obama administration had held, is the answer to the problem. They're not the source of the problem, as well as the political reality that they are in an election year where in which President Biden is not doing particularly well right now, having suffered a number of what we would call mental gaffes or mental breaks in his fluency, in his ability to carry the day rhetorically, and therefore this is really what has happened here is they have outed in a way or fronted Israel, or platformed Israel as being the problem, as opposed to being the victim. Israel is being fronted as the villain because of its having been forced to exercise an enormous amount of power in order to kill off this genocidal Hamas regime. And in fact, I will say this: what's very, very important, that the Americans are playing with fire, because if the Americans think that they are protecting their own national interest by, in a way, platforming Israel as exercising too much unguarded or undisciplined power, A, they're wrong factually, and B, politically, they're only endangering America's position in the region, because the Iranians have really exposed America for acting in a very weak way in the eyes of the Arab world, in the eyes of the Iranian regime. And I think that to finish, the United States is outing, if you will, of Israel, whether it's sanctioning what they call settlers for all kinds of accusations that have been completely unsubstantiated, or by trying to corner Israel as using too much undisciplined power. They will find themselves in a weaker position in the Middle East, with an Iran that has become more adventuresome, more dangerous, more aggressive, and more assertive.
Well, with regard to particularly the settler equation, there are radical elements within that. But the fact of the matter is they sanctioned 4 individuals out of 500,000 of individuals who live in the so-called West Bank districts of Judea, Samaria, the Jordan Valley, something that speaks volumes for itself. But nonetheless, Professor Rosenthal...
Jonathan, they sanctioned dozens more, but under American law, their identities, because it has to do with immigration law and naturalization and citizenship, their identities have not been made public. This came in December. The more recent one, which was emulated by Great Britain, named the 4 individuals, but there are more than 4.
All right, well, I stand corrected on that. Nonetheless, a couple of dozen versus 500,000, there's a big gap there that needs to be identified. The majority of people living in disputed territories, those are still disputed territories under international law, irrespective of UN Security Council Resolution 2234, we need 2334, excuse me, we need to take into account all the variables within that. Now, Professor Rosenthal, when we're looking particularly on the European approach, Mr. Oren and Dr. Diker mentioned, of course, Lord Cameron, his vendetta right now about Israeli activities to counter and to eradicate the Islamist Hamas, which remains quite open about its ambition to eradicate Israel.
Sure.
Nonetheless, it seems like there is a certain equation that has disconnected Western logic with reality on the ground. What is the root cause of that?
Well, let me actually follow up on what Dan Diker said. On the European end, I would say very simply that the October 7 has actually been forgotten in a way. And that by now you could say that the public notion of what is going on is actually, for a large part of public opinion and also for the left in the Western world and for pro-Palestine demonstrators and lobbies and for many dominant media channels, Israel is the perpetrator of war crimes, if not genocide, and the Palestinians, and for them it just mixed up with Hamas, are the victims. That's the situation we are in right now. And let me say that if you talk about how that comes about, I would very simply say that Israel is losing the war of images in the public channels in the Western world. It's very simple. The people are being overloaded with images of dying and wounded Palestinian Gazan women and children. And meanwhile, there are no images, of course, of the hostages which are underground. So the story is simply that Israel is losing that war of images. And this also boils down to another point. And I would like to actually say a few words about the court procedures in both the International Court of Justice and the Appeals Court now in the Netherlands, which has expressed its verdict on the spare parts of the F-35. What strikes me is that both the International Court and the Appeals Court here in the Netherlands base their verdicts on very, very disputable and biased sources. It's unbelievable to see that they base their verdicts on information, pseudo data for a large part, from Al Jazeera, from UNRWA, from Amnesty International, and other pro-Palestine, anti-Israel lobbies. That's the situation we are in. And this makes for very awkward and difficult situations also, for instance, for the government of the Netherlands. To give you the brief picture, the court has come up with a verdict which is very disputable by itself. The government is now going to the Supreme Court for a cassation of the case on the simple idea and principle that the state's sovereignty in foreign policies cannot be disputed. And meanwhile, it is a terrible blow for the reliability of, for instance, the Dutch government, also in the NATO context, that they actually are not a reliable partner in the NATO context. So that is the situation we are in. And let me add one point, which has also been emphasized by Dan earlier on. Meanwhile, from the beginning and for so many years, we see, I'm going again here, we see Iran going ahead with its tentacles, not only to the Middle East, but also to Western Europe, including the UK, and we are actually doing nothing about it. Iran is working its military way by its proxies, and it is very, very energetic and also rather successful on the diplomatic front. That is the situation we are in. And in my country, for instance, people like me have to do our utmost to fight this biased perspective on what is going on in the war in Gaza. And our prime minister, he was yesterday in Israel. He said, of course, that there should be an immediate release of hostages, but all the attention is going to his message that there should be an immediate ceasefire as well. That's the situation we are in.
Professor Rosenthal correctly said that October 7th was forgotten, and what is now in the public limelight is only what is happening with the IDF operating in Gaza. And indeed, Nahal Oz and Be'eri, two of the communities ravaged by the perpetrators, were forgotten. Only Khan Yunis and Rafah are now remembered. And this is as if you asked anyone in the Western world to name one event in American-Japanese relations, and rather than Pearl Harbor, they would say Hiroshima. They would have forgotten what started it all and gone directly to the other end.
Indeed. Dr. Diker, I'd like to ask you, since what I'm deeply concerned about is non-governmental organizations that receive vast grants from foreign actors, including totalitarian regimes, including Qatar, having such a significant say in courts that ultimately dictate foreign policy in certain nations. And another element thereof, including the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And I remember vividly the instance where there was the prosecutor who sought to prosecute the United States at the time for alleged war crimes in Afghanistan, who ultimately stepped down because it was found that she was corrupt to the core. What
Absolutely.
can be done in such a reality?
Well, that was in 2016, Jonathan, when
Right.
the International Criminal Court, a prosecutor who was I believe of African descent. I've forgotten her last name, but I've forgotten her last name. But she received a complaint from Palestinian so-called human rights organizations against the United States Operation Afghanistan and against the Israeli counterterror operation in Gaza, and on charges of war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. And she was Benusa, I think her name was, and she was asked to step down because these claims ended up being baseless and without merit. But as you point out, and as Mr. Oren points out, and Professor Rosenthal, we are living in a world of social networks. We are living in a world of where opinion trumps facts, feelings trump facts. Social networks are driving reality, perception warfare. As we learned, we're all old enough, fortunately or unfortunately, to remember the Soviet Union's strategy of active measures, which is deception warfare, disinformation warfare. This is precisely the main threat that we all face today as members of the free world, of the democratic West, is that it is the perception of the last image that drives the reality that people see, believe, and vote on. And it is extraordinarily important to fight on this battlefield and not leave it in a vacuum, which is being very quickly filled by very sophisticated terrorist malign actors such as Hezbollah, such as the Hamas, such as the Houthis, driven by the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is the brain of the octopus, not only the heart and soul. And it really deserves a lot of attention, because it is the perception warfare, the influence operations that are distorting reality, but creating court cases that Professor Rosenthal weighed in on as far as the Netherlands is concerned. But it is also shaping the views of the Western Alliance, and I would suggest distorting them beyond recognition at times.
Chief Prosecutor Ben Sauda from the Gambia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Ben Sauda, correct.
Yeah. Professor Rosenthal, when we're looking, though, and this is so alarming to people, I think, all over the Western Hemisphere, since how can people then feel comfortable with a judiciary, also within international law, that is so easily tampered with?
I would say that people don't actually feel at ease with any kind of criticism on the judiciary, on the judges, both on the domestic and on the international side. They get impressed by the idea that, or they actually are, they are keen on the notion of independent and neutral and expert kind of people who are sitting there in their robes, and there is no, let me say, balanced kind of assessment of what the courts at hand are doing. And in my country, and in the UK, by the way, some people may express criticism on the judiciary, on whatever subject, but they are easily attacked with the statement that they are undermining the independence of the international and domestic courts. That is going on already for years. And when we talk about NGOs, they actually have a sort of carte blanche to bring their cases to the court, suggesting that they are public interest groups, they call them like that, are protected by law for that reason. But at the same time, they don't speak for the people at large, for the silent majority. And that is the problem we are in.
I think the silent majority is the key here, since I am convinced that the majority of indigenous Britons are wholeheartedly supportive of their own country, for that matter, as well as of Israel and the Western Hemisphere. Nevertheless, the demographics are shifting all over the world. And I don't say that all immigrants are anti those countries. I'm saying that there is a certain misconception regarding the education systems that are bolstering the voices from countries or people who come from countries where freedoms are put at question time and again, where there is no freedom for that matter. But we're drawing near to the end of the program, and I'd like to give each of you 1 minute, no more, of a more optimistic assessment for the near future. I'm hopeful. Mr. Oren, we'll start with you.
Well, perhaps it will not be over-optimistic, but I would just like to get in a good word for President Biden. Obviously, the criticism we have heard and sounded ourselves is quite sound. It is based. But the alternative is an isolationist stream. Without getting into the personality of Donald Trump, he represents an isolationist stream in
Not
America.
necessarily, the fringes thereof.
Yes, but also what he said about NATO and the fact that the Western alliance used to be based on a bipartisan sort of consensus, and it is no longer so.
Indeed. Well, time will tell. Actions speak louder than words, even though words from Trump or any presidential candidate carry a lot of weight and should be reconsidered at times. Dr. Diker?
Jonathan, very quickly, I think that for the future of the free world, the United States-led Western Alliance, the European Union, and the United Kingdom must stop pressuring Israel to submit to what they call a two-state solution, which can be argued could lead to a final solution. It is absolutely a prize for genocide to assert that following the worst mass murder of any small nation state and its Jewish and Muslim and Christian population and Druze population, in this case, that Israel should be, or any country should be pressured in creating a safe space or a sovereign nation. It would be tantamount to calling for an Al-Qaeda state in Englewood, New Jersey, following 9/11. It's absolutely unthinkable. And in order for the future of the free world, they would have to, it would be required and appropriate to unconditionally support Israel's right to defend itself, bring back its hostages, and to assert its freedom in this teeny nation state called Israel in a massive and tumultuous Middle East that is undergoing a radicalization that we have not seen in many, many decades.
Professor Rosenthal, you have time for one line.
Europe should step up its defense expenditures. It should be partnered to a defense of the free world, and Israel is part and parcel of this free world, and we should understand that and acknowledge it to the fullest.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Dan Diker, Professor Uri Rosenthal, Mr. Amir Oren, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.